Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on our weekly AJA Zoom event, and welcome to any new people this week. I'd also like to welcome any people from our communal organisations who may be watching, and I hope you enjoy the session. We also have people watching on Facebook and some who listen to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Community Radio. That's at FM 88 in Melbourne or at j-air.com.au. So welcome to you all. My name is Alan Freedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association. And on your screen, you can see David Adler, who's President of the AJA, direct from the Andrew Bolt Show. And our guest tonight, Michael Danby, direct from the Credlin Show. The topic, of course, is a report card on the Albanese government to date and a discussion on world events. The format will be an interview-style chat with Michael, and then we'll take questions. And as I always mention, if you do want to ask a question, we ask you to raise your hand electronically. That lets us know that you want to ask a question because we need to give you the option of unmuting when the time comes. You can put a question on the chat function, and Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read some of them out during question time if we've got some time. And you can disable the chat if you want to. Now, Anthony Albanese's Labor government is just 2 months into its term, as expected, and as expected, all the campaign promises and hype have probably been replaced with some sobering reality as the government tries to strike a middle ground. One notable disappointment, which we'll get to in a moment, was the government's decision not to join 22 other countries in condemning the UNHRC's intention to make investigating Israel a permanent and open-ended inquiry process. Apart from that, the world is more fractured than ever, with China, Iran and Russia all flexing their muscles, adding to war or the threat of war and untold human suffering around the globe. Former Labor MP Michael Danby needs no introduction to this audience, as throughout his entire career, he has stood up for Israel in Parliament and spoke out loudly against the injustices perpetrated by those countries I just mentioned. To get his assessment of the current government so far and his views on world events, we're delighted to have him join us once again, and it's good to have you back. Michael, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks,
Michael. Let's begin with the thorny one first. Barely 3 weeks into government and claiming to restore Australia's relationships with key allies, Albo turned his back on the US, Canada and the UK, which were among the group of 22 countries that expressed, quote, deep concern about an open-ended commission of inquiry set up to permanently investigate alleged human rights abuses by Israel against the Palestinian Arabs. Was that the right move in your opinion? What do you think of it?
Well, obviously not. I think the opposition of the democracies at the UN Human Rights Council in the evil fascist headquarters, and I'm not joking about that, it's fascist architecture in Geneva, of the old League of Nations headquarters was a wrong thing. Our Jewish community so-called representative organisations let them off the hook by saying that Australia did make a statement saying that the focus of these organisations, of the UNHRC, was incorrect, and that was enough for Australia to have distinguished itself by making a statement expressing doubts. I mean, the UNHCR is anyone who wants to know about it should read the blog, the Twitter, the Facebook of Hillel Neuer. It is a appalling organisation where Iran is involved with the Women's Committee, where China is involved with the Human Rights Committee, where genuine human rights people seldom ever get to speak, except when Hillel Neuer and his brave little band of resistors talks from the back of the room, and he gives all kinds of people, whether they're Palestinian dissidents or whoever, the right to speak. But we haven't come to the big decision on how Australia will vote on a Palestinian state yet. And to be fair, Albo and Wong have done a good symbolic job so far in international affairs, particularly not varying from the Australian mainstream on China. China is the big issue. China is super aggressive. I don't know whether Australians have woken up to it. Certainly, if you look at the electors in Kooyong, where that woman Ryan said that recently that we have to be nicer to our chief trading partner, have woken up to how bad this regime is. There was a program that redeemed Four Corners a couple of nights ago about how they bought the Solomons. $3 million slush fund has paid for all of the politicians in the government majority in the Solomons to support the current Prime Minister, Sogavari. And this is what we in Australia are up against. This is an emergency. I'm glad there's that defence review that Albo and Miles have agreed to, and they've got to buy more weapons to defend Australia.
Michael, can I just bring you back to the Palestinian state recognition for a moment? Of course, as this audience would know, Penny Wong said that this was going to be a priority in the next Labor government. Should we be concerned about it?
Well, I know lots of official Israelis who think that what Australia decides on a Palestinian state is irrelevant and laughable even. There is that element of, balanced consideration of Australia's role in all of this, but it's a symbolic thing that ought not to happen, and we ought not to belittle the activities of people, including myself, who have opposed this so strongly. The Palestinians do not deserve recognition. A third of their budget is spent funding pay-for-slay murderers. They haven't had an election in 16 years. They're divided between Islamic fanatics and PA fanatics who, the Israeli armed forces are hunting down in the Nablus Kasbah tonight. So, I wonder why Fowler hasn't made its third series appearance. It's probably because they're filming out there the real thing. You can't make it up as quick as it's actually really happening. So the real world is Israel is a technological and military superpower almost in that area. It's engaging with the world. It's got one of the happiest populations on the planet. Its economy is booming with high tech, and its relationship with real Arab states is wonderful. And let's hope it can soon happen with Saudi Arabia. This is the real world. And the Germans have a great word for the importance of Australia's vote on whether there's a Palestinian state or not, and that is Wolkenkuckucksheim, cloud cuckoo land. And it's cloud cuckoo land to focus on those kind of things when we don't focus on all of the opportunities and advancements, etc. The real issue in the Middle East is not a Palestinian state. The real issue is whether these cranky ayatollahs in Iran are close to developing a nuclear weapon, and how Israel deals with it. And what will Australia, like all of the other countries, say if they're forced to take military action against them? Yes,
but if Labor does recognise a Palestinian state, and you say it will be symbolic, what happens after that? I mean, does anything change, or what actually happens as far as Australia is concerned?
I suppose we might have an official, as we have an unofficial Palestinian embassy in Canberra. I suppose that would mean Australian taxpayers' aid might be increased, shoveling out to this corrupt Palestinian Authority that Palestinians demonstrate against, that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians say is utterly corrupt and unrepresentative. And they're the good guys compared to Hamas. So look, it's Wolkenkuckucksheim stuff. The longer this gets from Bob Carr and his ghastly gang's manoeuvres to get this resolution through at the National Labor Party conference, the more unrealistic and otherworldly it seems.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Bob Carr and also Gareth Evans. It seems like these elder statesmen of the party seem to wield quite a bit of influence. Is that correct?
I don't know about Gareth Evans, who was called that when he wanted to be UN Secretary General following the illustrious Boutros Ghali, who was Secretary General of the UN. But it's certainly so with Carr. Unfortunately, you can see Carr's nefarious influence in New South Wales Labor. I recently told the Sky News program, Alan, that how Kafkaesque the situation was, how ironic the situation was. Here I am, I said, on Sky TV, praising Albo and Wong for their realistic behaviour with China in so many different venues all around the world, opposing Beijing's aggression. I mean, a lot of it's only rhetoric so far, I would concede that, but I'm implicitly condemning Bob Carr's ghastly gang in the New South Wales right. So here I am, a lifelong social democrat, praising our two pragmatic socialist left leaders and condemning the New South Wales Labor right.
Okay, David, I'll hand over to you for a couple of questions.
Okay. Michael, firstly, before I ask you a couple of questions, I want to say how much I appreciate, and I think our community appreciates, your principled clarity across a whole range of issues. And it never ceases to surprise me on how many you actually must be reading AJA policy, because it's almost identical.
Well, I think you're complimenting yourself, David. I read extremely widely, and I can do almost Talmudic dissertations on why Corey Bernardi adopting Tucker Carlson's slandering of Zelensky is the wrong thing. So let's be careful here. I've got my own views on a lot of things.
Okay. Well, I want to amplify two things and ask you why this information is not used more broadly. Now, you mentioned Bob Carr a couple of times already. This is a screenshot from Present Wealth website, which is, as the writing there says, Australia's first Islamically compliant super fund. It has net assets over 300 million as of the previous financial year. And there's an associated charity of which a certain, the On Professor Bob Carr is chairman. Now, I'm not suggesting anything untoward here, but if you're going to make highly critical statements about Israel and try to influence the Australian government policy, isn't that relevant information? Why is no journalist, no commentators, nobody other than us seem ready to expose it?
Well, it should be referenced when he's speaking on those kind of issues. They, of course, would say we're being racist by focusing on this organisation because working for some capitalist organisation is no business of anyone's. Anyone is in an open society is free to work for whoever. I noticed they're organised on the basis of not on Islamic law, that they don't. Their banks don't collect so-called interest because that's not according to their practice. But you know, he worked for Macquarie Bank before he worked for this this outfit. When he was plucked from obscurity after being Prime Minister, Julia Gillard's biggest mistake, he was working for Macquarie Bank on the, of course, interestingly, the China account. So I think that's the main thing to focus on, David, rather than even his nefarious Islamic extremist connections. I'm not saying that this bank is necessarily Islamic extremist. It's his work on behalf of China. And again, I do this every time I appear anywhere, and people ask me about Bob Carr. I want everyone to go to Google and reference Professor John Fitzgerald's 3-page article on him in the Financial Review three years ago. It's a tour de force. It is verbatim what Carr has said about Australia and China in his own words on Chinese television. You won't be able to find this anywhere else. And it is a devastating portrait of a man who was the Foreign Minister of Australia. Absolutely devastating. He is the leader of the Beijing lobby, and the Beijing lobby is a danger to Australia, and therefore his role is very, very dubious and ought to be highlighted all the time. I think outside New South Wales, to be fair, David, he's widely discredited.
That's interesting. I mean, my obvious point is that the organised, and again, I want to be careful not to imply anything inappropriate or illegal, but other than the association is with groups that are likely to have a view that's not very sympathetic to Israel. So he's involved in that group. He might be receiving a director's fee from it. The financial accounts are not clear. And it's normal that if you've got overlapping interests, that you should declare them.
That's true.
I'm not aware of this.
They don't declare his interests with being on the consultative committees of the pro-Beijing lobby of the United Front that operates in Australia. If you look at the pictures of him over the last 10 years in China, you'll see that Bob Carr is nearly at every function of the Beijing Front organisations in Australia, and that ought to be declared too. Now, for instance, when he appears on the ABC, as he still does sometimes, I wonder whether his friend John Lyons, who's in charge of global news, prevents the ABC correctly attributing to him some of these pro-Beijing attributes. Now, that's very important because 80% plus of Australians, according to the Lowy poll, have increasing doubts about China. Why don't you declare Bob Carr's Beijing credentials, ABC, when you have him on? It really, really would colour people's views.
All right, let me come back to another thing you raised concerning Israel, and you touched on the pay for slave program of the Palestinian Authority. I want to make sure that you and everyone here has front of mind some work we did in raising the question of whether the Palestinian Authority meets the criteria as a terrorist organisation under Australian law. And here's the conclusion of an opinion that we sought from Jeremy Rapke, the former DPP of Victoria, who's handled probably as many terror cases as anyone else in this country. It is strongly arguable that such payments incentivise, reward and glorify terrorism when coupled with public praising of and recognition given to terrorists from a purely evidentiary perspective. And then the bold. The conclusion that the PA is a terrorist organisation by reason of its fostering of doing of terrorist acts seems almost inevitable. So
it's a great opinion. It's very important that you got it, but almost no one knows about it. So I propose we take 3 of the leading Jewish community organisations, halve their budget, take the other half and get that opinion published in every newspaper in Australia, if not on the front page a la Clive Palmer, at least on page 3. I mean, do you think the average punter in Bundaberg or Menangatang supports their money going to people like this? Of course they don't.
Exactly.
They don't know about it though. And the people who are responsible for getting this information out there by using, social media or advanced means, it's very nice that, you're a toughless organisation and you produce this information. But unless the punters in Menangatang or Bundaberg know about it, it's not going to have an effect.
So it needs much more public exposure. I guess it's like you putting up.
What do you think of my idea of halving the budgets of half a dozen community organisations and using the other half to put that opinion on in. I think for the average Jewish person, that'd be far more effective use of their money.
It would, and we did a lot of work to get Australia to stop giving cash to the PA, and that's exactly the argument that we used, Michael, that the average Aussie, regardless of their understanding of Middle East politics, which might be close to zero, they don't want to be associated with terrorist organisations. So,
can I just say one thing? Kol hakavod to those Jewish philanthropists from Australia, including the Pratt Foundation and some of the people in Sydney who I know I probably shouldn't mention, who partially fund NGO Monitor, who have run this fantastic case of exposing the person in Gaza who worked for World Vision and is proved by an Israeli court convicted of working for Hamas as well.
Michael, thank you for introducing next week's event.
Good. Well, let me just say to you one thing about this. I wrote an op-ed about this in response to the Reverend Costello, who refuses to face any of these facts. And of course, the Aged newspaper refused to publish it unless I provided a full court translation by an independent translator. So within the next 6 hours, I sent them a translation of the edited highlights of the court case, but that wasn't good enough for them. And what they've done is censored the presentation of another point of view, the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Only the Reverend Costello gets to have his view on Australian taxpayers' money being used to fund a Hamasnik who was convicted in a court in Israel in Beersheba just a few weeks ago. And one other bit of news for your program next week, in Jerusalem, there's another court case, Reverend Costello, and you better watch out for this one because there's more than $100 million of money that's been collected by World Vision over the last decade. And it seems that only $80 million of that has been accounted for. So the Jerusalem the Charities Commission, like any Charities Commission in any democratic society, has to see that organisations collect the money and spend them for the purposes for which they were given. And it's likely, it may have already happened, that this Jerusalem court, in a separate court case from the Beersheba court, will abolish World Vision's ability to operate in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel proper. And that will be deserved if it's correct that they have failed to account for the monies received and disbursed.
Okay. Now, I see we've got a lot of questions, so I think we should throw it open a little bit early, Alan, and get some of these questions.
Okay.
Right.
Yep. Okay. We can always come back to some other things. So now, everybody, if you're listening to J-Air, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night. And our guest tonight is Michael Danby on current world events and his views on the Albanese government so far. We've already touched on next week's event, but I'm just going to hand over to David to show a little bit more and do his usual spiel.
Okay, well, just for 1 minute, if there's anybody here who is not yet supporting AJA after this event, please go to the website jewishassociation.org.au, where you can apply for membership, you can join the email list, you can make a donation, and please do those things. If you are not yet following the Facebook page, do so for daily updates on news and views. Now, as Michael already alluded to, next week we have the research director of NGO Monitor, and we are talking about the World Vision issues, how that happened, what it means about the way that NGOs operate around Israel. And I do want to just, for those people in Sydney, we have a special event tomorrow evening in association with Chabad Double Bay, in person. Don't miss it. We have the Director of Foreign Relations of the Nakhala settlement movement, Lital Mamarash Slonim. It's all about supporting Jewish communities in Judea Samaria, and that's 6:30 at Chabad Double Bay. Dinner and presentation for just $25. And I can say that we have some other international visitors in Sydney at the moment, and that is our partners from Ariel University, and they will also be present. So we'll have Nachala Movement and Ariel University at Chabad Double Bay tomorrow evening, 6:30.
Thanks, David. Okay, over to the audience. Michael Bird, you were first, then we've got Jeff, Dennis and Rod. So Michael, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
I'd like to ask you, I've got it from what I consider very reliable sources, that the Progressive New Israel Fund have been working with Tony Burke on trying to get the government to recognise a, well, fictitious but Palestinian state. And not only with the federal government, I've recently come to understand that they're also working with the New South Wales government, the New Israel Fund, trying to get them to convince them to recognise Palestinian state. One, do you know about this? And number two, if you don't know about this, can you check into us and confirm whether it's true or not?
With the New South Wales government, first of all, from what I understand, that outfit has very limited influence on the leader of the opposition who might become the Premier given events in New South Wales. But I couldn't say 100% for sure that it hasn't been raised with him. The influence of Bob Carr and his ghastly gang, I've explained, is mainly in New South Wales, and they will try and influence things through the New South Wales Parliament and party. But my reading of it is that it's not successful now, nor will be in the future. Secondly, Michael, is the federal one with Tony Burke a surprise to you? I mean, that's their policy. They said at their national conference that at some point they will try and get recognition of a Palestinian state. That's all we've been talking about in the first part of the program. It's Luftgeschäft. If they will do that at some point when Israel does something wrong as a sort of punishment. But what effect does it have? Is Israel's demography going to go down from 10 million to 7 million because Tony Burke disapproves of them? Is Israel's high-tech industry going to even murmur because of Bob Carr's existence? I was in Tel Aviv 3 years ago, and I did a survey of people in North Tel Aviv. No one had ever heard of Tony Walker, John Lyons, Bob Carr, or the whole gang. So don't worry. It's a bad thing if it happens, but that's their declared policy. Of course, they'll be trying to do it. The real point that you're making is the New Israel Fund.
Yes,
I can't understand how people in the Jewish community would have people working on this. Why don't these heroes try and raise consciousness about the looming Iranian nuclear threat? Now that's tachlis. That's threatening the whole 9 million people of Israel. There'll be no new Israel. There'll be no New Israel Fund if the Iranians are successful.
Yes. Okay. Jeff, your turn. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Shalom, people. Tell me, Michael, this is a greeting from Niagara, bordering USA. You've mentioned to me in the past that you can't abandon your tribe being the Labor Party. So tell me, how is it possible that every single major policy of the Labor Party, whenever they've had the opportunity to be so, has been antagonist to Israel? And wouldn't it be easier if you joined the Conservative parties, aka Liberal Party? Wouldn't it be easier for you?
It would not be easier for me.
A high quality.
It wouldn't be easier for me at all. And you can't remember all of Australian history because Izzy Liebler of blessed memory worked very closely with Bob Hawke on Soviet Jewry. Even the current Labor Party policy is opposed to boycott, divestment and sanctions, unlike social democrat or left-wing parties all over the world. So if you abandon the field to one political party and the other comes into power, what say do you have? What representation do you have with the current government? Do you just pray to Hashem that Albo and Wong will be wiped off the face of the earth? Let me tell you a truth. They won't be. And you've got to influence them, and you've got to do, as an Australian citizen, as much as you can, rationally and in a balanced way, to influence. The Jewish community is only 0.05% of the Australian population, and it would be a shame if we aligned ourselves just with one side of politics. After all, in Israel, they don't align themselves with just one side of politics. And I think you could argue that the current Israeli government has done a good job on Iran, just as Netanyahu before them did a good job. So I'm not abandoning, never abandoned the Jewish tribe, and I won't abandon my former political party that I represented in Parliament, because it's not just counterproductive politically, it's aesthetically revolting to see people, be turncoats.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, Dennis, Rod and Saul. So Dennis, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Michael, when you were in Parliament as a member of the Labor Party, you were an outspoken supporter within the party for the cause of Israel. I think you earned a lot of respect within the Jewish community for that. Australians
Can I just interrupt you for a second? I got a lot of respect inside the Labor Party too. Even for people who didn't agree with me, they said, oh, this guy's a bit gritty. He stands up for things that are not popular.
And that brings me to the question. We are always proud of the Jewish MPs on both sides of the House. In the Labor Party, there is currently an Attorney General by the name of Mark Dreyfus who is Jewish. What has he done within the party in support of Israel? If he has, why don't we know about it? And if he hasn't, we haven't heard about it anyway, why not?
Well, I used to be quite a close friend of Mark's, and I split with him very strongly over his ridiculous call for the Frydenberg family to have their citizenship investigated. And my views were joined by Bill Shorten, who pushed Mark back away from a press conference and refused to let the then opposition proceed with that inquiry. He has done good things in the past. He has prevented worse things than recognition of a Palestinian state being passed at the National Conference. He doesn't have a very strong Jewish electorate down there in the southeast of Melbourne. And without me and Mike Kelly, who's the Mechatonim of Ehud Olmert, and the late Senator Kitching, there's less pressure on him to do the right thing. There are many good people still there on Labor's side, Shane Newnham, Peter Khalil, who's a Coptic Christian, and Meryl Swanson in New South Wales. But, you know, people change through time, become more active or less active. It's not for me to personally decry someone who's Jewish as not doing what I might have done.
Yeah, I guess what Dennis was getting at, of course, is that we haven't really seen any public support for Israel over the years. Do we just assume he doesn't support Israel?
No, you don't assume that at all. He's at all Jewish and Israeli events in Canberra or in Melbourne. He will be there showing his support. But and you know, if you want to link some of the positions of the Labor Party on terrorism to the Israel issue, then he would have been quite active on them. He would have been effective in seeing that Hamas and Hezbollah we joined the Liberal Party in seeing that they were classified as terrorist organisations. So that's not insubstantial.
And could you anticipate how he might vote if it came down to this Palestinian state issue?
Well, he would say that he's bound by Labor Party policy. He might put up some fight inside the cabinet. After all, he's Attorney General. But you know, I'm not close to him anymore. I don't know. You'd be better off getting my dear friend Peter Khalil on a future AJA association, or Peter Khalil's wife, Lydia, who used to work for the CIA and now works for Lowy in Melbourne. She's a genius on Middle East politics.
Okay, so yes, certainly we'll follow that up. Thanks, Michael. Rod, your turn. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay. Hi, Michael. Thanks for being on. I was wondering, in the past, Albo and Tamia Plibersek have been very stridently anti-Israel and at times almost verging into anti-Semitism. Do you think their views change? How do you view that, or they just learn to shut up?
Good question. No, they've actually learned. I think the enormous fight I had with Tanya over Arik Sharon when we both first got in, about like a year afterwards, etc., was such a lesson for her. She has been patiently and quietly associating herself with Jewish organisations, Holocaust centres, Jewish art centres in Sydney, etc., just to raise her own knowledge, and I would praise her for that. I still don't agree with her views on Israel. I think, unfortunately, because of the Australian media, a lot of Australian politicians, unless they go there, don't catch up with how Israel has changed, how the international climate has changed. They see things through the narrow world presented to them by John Lyons on the ABC of the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian issue only. And as for Albo, I was present with Albo when the Israeli embassy brought someone who the AJA mightn't like, Merav Michali from the Israeli Labor Party, to speak to the Parliamentary Friends of Israel. When I was there, we used to have functions, every 2 or 3 weeks. Different organisations would bring people to Canberra, and the embassy brought Merav Michali because what they were trying to do was preempt a Labor Party being elected, and was to show them the other side of things. And Albo got up and he said, I want to thank the Israeli embassy, and I want to thank Merav Michali, and I want to thank the Parliamentary Friends of Israel for introducing me to these people over recent years and making an effort to see that I understood the wider issues. So I think we'll get this ridiculous vote for the Volkan Kukulksheim, Cloud Cuckoo Land Palestinian state with Mohammed Abbas 16 years into a 4-year term, or 17 years into a 4-year term. But there's no BDS. There's opposition to the Greens on their terrible attitudes to Israel. And I can't see that this government, Penny Wong or Albo, will be antagonistic to Israel or the Jewish community beyond that. Now, the most important thing, in my view, would be to get the current leadership, either Albo or Wong or Plibersek, to Israel while they're in government. And I just think being there turns people's minds.
Is that doable, Michael? I mean, is that something that's realistic to get them to Israel, or to get one of them to Israel? We
have a very, very smart Israeli ambassador. And I can imagine, knowing him, like the previous Yuval Rotem or Mark Soffer, he'll be working at 100 miles an hour below the iceberg, pedaling hard away to see these kind of things are happening. And, it's a big, rich, successful technological society that can help Australia with counterintelligence, with cyber security, with defence needs, all of these kind of things. Even agriculture should get some of the National Party sent over there. They could do with some education too. There's a couple of them that aren't too good. That would all be to the good. The more engagement we have with Israel, the better. It's the best advertisement for itself that a country could be.
Yes, yes. Okay, Saul, your turn. Please unmute yourself. And then Ron.
Thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights with us. It really has been quite wonderful to hear you. Could I just ask you, at the possibility that I'd be regarded as racist in asking it, I noticed that The Age has as its features editor a man by the name of Maher Mukhrabi. Would that be a factor in your not having anything published by them?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's the answer. Anything else, Saul, or is that... No, I think you've made...
Saul would like me to elaborate a little bit?
Go ahead.
When The Age appointed a new editor-in-chief some years ago, Andrew Jaspan, an obscure editor from the Scottish Herald, of all places, he came to Melbourne and imposed his values on the Melbourne Age. Its circulation went down, but he brought with him his features editor from the Scottish Herald, this obscure Palestinian journalist who you referred to, Saul, and he has stayed there ever since. He's famous for an incident in very recent years where, forget me and the Jewish lobby and fancy me trying to put another point of view in response to the Reverend Costello, but he edited, he censored, he suppressed the foreign relations writer of the Sydney Morning Herald and Age, Anthony Galloway, who wrote an objective report of a meeting Albanese had with the Jewish community and what the implications were, and also Wong was present too. Can you believe the chutzpah of a person who was a staff editor at The Age suppressing one of their journalists' commissioned pieces for the Sydney Morning Herald? So that's how bad it is. Unfortunately, the current editor of the paper, Gay Alcorn, who everyone says to me is an improvement, but I'm yet to see the proof of it. Improvement on Jaspan rhymes with Petan, by the way. She doesn't cause him to do anything different. I mean, how could the editor-in-chief of The Age allow her Gunsa in Canberra, Anthony Galloway, to be suppressed by some guy because he's got a personal agenda? It's outrageous. It should be known by people much more widely in Melbourne, but you'll never hear it on the ABC. Virginia Trioli will never comment on it because, you know, to her, it's not an issue.
And that, Michael, leads to the way we are at the moment with this division of media, where it's either left-leaning or right-leaning. And I lament the times when you could pick up the newspaper and get a good offering from both sides, and that's gone, hasn't it? Those days seem to have gone.
Well, it's particularly as it affects the Jewish community. The news agents, when they used to exist, would have told Jaspan, as they would tell Gay Alcorn, south of the Yarra, The Age's circulation fell by 40% over the last years. And that's largely because highly educated Jewish community, doctors, lawyers, real estate people, people in business, all stopped getting it. And that's because, Gay Alcorn, you don't run a fair debate. Occasionally, you give Julie Sego a leg up, and that's meant to sort of be, she's an intelligent woman, an answer to the overwhelming line that The Age used to have. It's not as bad because it doesn't cover the issue as much as it used to. But as to having a feisty debate, Alan, as it should, and all outfits should, they don't do it. I was astonished the other day to see a Four Corners program on how China has bought the Solomons. It was a revelation because it was old, objective, non-ideological revelations and expose journalism that you used to see at that station and that network, and it could easily happen.
Okay, Ron, your turn. Thanks, Michael. Ron, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Michael, Ron Raab here. Just a quick question about the Greens. I mean, they're obviously getting more and more successful, and they'll carry their antipathy to Israel with them. So I know we've been trying to sideline them and ignore them, but I mean, I don't think that's going to be enough in the future, because they're taking the whole Green movement with them, which is becoming more and more popular. And then just one more quick one. What happened to Bob Carr? He used to be an Israel lover. What happened in his brain when he did the switch? That's it.
Ron, you've grown a moustache since I last saw you. A big one. Is it Movember already? Look, the Green Party, what can I say about them? They are uninformed, unintelligent, ahistorical. And what's interesting for those of us who observe the international situation is what a contrast they are to the German Greens. The German Greens on the issue of Ukraine and Russia and China are better than the centre-left or the centre-right. How ironic is that? I wish we could send the Green political party here over to Ukraine or for a course in Germany with their colleagues there. Maybe that would improve them. But I'm reaching for a long bow, because they're unredeemable. The real problem is, if you ask me, the Australian educational system, where generations of young people have been inculcated with a sort of fanatical views in the place of study of history and geography and English literature that provided the basis for everyone in the past for being either left or right. You had a same basic knowledge. Unfortunately, the Greens have so much support amongst the youth. How is it possible that an organisation like Hashomer Hatzair in Melbourne supports an organisation, the Green political party, which advocates the boycott of Israel? Why do they get subsidies from the Shaliach movement when they have those kinds of attitudes? But of course, it's quite natural, because they only hear one point of view. I think there's been a slight pushback inside the Jewish community amongst younger people because of the Bennett-Lapid Gantz government. And I'd say to David Adler, I mean, I think that's been a good thing, that people in politics generally, people in Australia to the extent that they follow it, even journalists who haven't been poisoned by John Lyons, know that there is a different point of view other than Bibi. Now, I'm not condemning Bibi or his views on Iran or his great performances at the UN, but I'm just saying Israel is a democratic society. A plurality of different views exist there, as they do here, and it's good for people here to understand that.
Yes, yes. Okay, we'll take a written question from Robert, and then we'll go to Anthony. Robert, please. No, you've just muted yourself.
Thanks, Michael. Just a question on a couple of non-Labor groups. What are your thoughts on the new Liberal Deputy Leader Susan Ley and her stance on Palestinians, and also on the Teals? What impact, if any, will they have?
Well, I expect the AJA will be fierce in following up Julian Leese's proposal to take her to Israel, so she no longer has the views of her father, who was in the British Special Branch, who in Jewish historiography are infamous in their hatred of Israel. I found myself, to my total surprise, in a really groovy Israeli suburb when I was last there. And in the middle of that suburb, which is an old working class suburb, there's an old shul established in 1943, and next to it is the Lecky Museum. Now, I'd seen the museum of all of the other political parties. You go into the Lecky Museum and you see that the British Special Branch executed Avram Stern with his hands tied behind his back, extrajudicial murder. Susan Lay's knowledge of this issue was formed when they lived in the UAE, apparently. But it's very important that you work with Julian Leeser to see that she goes and that her views are widened. So apart from her, what was the other group you were going to refer to?
The Teals, will they have any impact?
Oh. Again, it's difficult to believe that there are a couple of Jews who were the main PR people for the woman in Brighton whose name I even forget. Former ABC journalist.
No, Zoe Daniels.
Zoe
Daniels, who signed a petition when she wasn't in the public spotlight that it supported BDS, didn't it, David? And
yeah,
it said that Israel should get unfavourable coverage and it shouldn't be reported at all. And of course, you know, that's one of the most heavily Jewish represented suburbs. But again, a couple of younger ones, smart Alex, who think they know everything but who know nothing, giving her a leg up. So I don't anticipate much joy from her. As for the others, Allegra Spender's meant to be quite friendly, but I rely on David Adler to keep up his inimitable friendship with her, and to rely that she stays in the straight and narrow. There's a couple of others that Nishtahir, but I saw recently Monique Ryan, the person who regrettably took Josh Frydenberg's seat, stand up in the federal parliament and scream at the opposition members to put their masks on. Boy, is she a nasty person. She's going to come a cropper in federal parliament, where those kinds of personal traits come out much more than they do when you're just running in the electorate. And the way I say it was a shame, because Josh Frydenberg, although I'm on the other side of politics, is a decent person and made a great contribution to Australia, and to have such a high and mighty warrior for Australia brought down by such a nebuch is a shame for Australia, not just Kooyong, not just the Liberal Party, but for all of us, Anyhow, he's got Deutsche Bank in the meantime, and he says he's coming back. I'll believe it when I see it.
Okay, Anthony, we'll take you quickly, so please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for your comments. You've indicated quite clearly that Australia is also in quite a bit of turmoil politically, and this seems to be common with the whole of the Western world, and the failures of international organisations like the UN, the European Union, NATO. We lack leadership. We lack the big world institutions to do the right thing. Where do you think that we can make a comeback? Because without some leadership and some stronger international organisations, I don't see the current situation stabilising at all.
Well, people always say I'm an optimist, but I have a counter view to that. I agree with you. I understand the general malaise that you observe. The main malaise, the main problem is, let me be frank, the alter kaka in the White House. There's an expression, the fish stinks from the head. To undermine your own speaker, who is going to Taiwan and who's following a principled route of support for Tibet, support for civil rights in Hong Kong, and who wants to visit democratic Taiwan. Let me tell Bob Carr and all of the China lovers who will probably monitor this this thing afterwards. The 24 million people of Tibet, the same of Taiwan, the same population as Australia, don't want to live in a communist dictatorship. They prefer having mobile phones, a free press, elections, just like we do. And I don't agree with you about NATO and the EU. I think that the surprise for me has been how Putin hasn't been able to split NATO. NATO agreed just the other day to reduce their gas usage by 15% so that Putin can no longer blackmail them with the use of gas during the winter. Now, the Germans got themselves and the whole of Europe in this terrible problem by deciding they'll be so green that they will abolish their nuclear power, abolish their baseload power from coal, and use Russian gas as if that was some kind of renewable future. But NATO has been united, has supported the Ukrainians, and the fate of Australia rests in those battlefields too, in the eastern Donbass and around Kherson. Because if they are successful, Putin and his gang, it will give China so much encouragement to do what they would like to do to Taiwan. And what they want to do to Taiwan is not simply suppressing the lives of 24 million democratic Chinese people. It's taking control of this whole area. Please, people, go and see. I don't normally recommend the ABC, Alan, as you know, that Four Corners program on buying the Solomons. It's frightening. And if we don't, so my answer to the question is that we have so far performed well in seeing that the Ukrainians are able to stand up for the Russians. That has big worldwide implications. There won't be a change in the international mood until we have leaders in the United States that are more forceful, whether they're Democratic or Republican. We cannot afford to have a person who's put in front of a press conference about Ayman al-Zawahiri and can barely read out the press statement for him on his audio and visual aid. It's just, it's not possible. And to have that cackling idiot as the possible successor is also, can you believe it? America has such good people. Josh Rogan would be better. Bill Maher would be better. Even take away his weed for 3 years and run him as Democrat candidate for president of the United States. It can only be better. And the Republicans have got lots of people. They've got Pompeo and DeSantis, and there'll be a change of mood in America, and that will be very, very important. Now, I'll just end by telling you that the Chinese Party Congress is in November. Xi will be nominated as dictator for life, certainly for another 5 years, which was not the Chinese policy before, starting to be in for 2 terms of 5 years. That was the great reforms of Deng Xiaoping. Let's hope after he's consolidated that there is enough time for the Western world to reorganize itself in the following 2 years before Beijing moves. That's the crucial question for the Western world.
Okay, we've come up to time. Michael, it's always a pleasure to have you with us, and you're welcome anytime. Tell me, do you miss being in Parliament, because you seem to be doing so well on the media?
Well, the media is limited. Yeah, I'm doing well on the media, but there are a number of other things that are meant to have happened with things in the arts and things with charities that haven't worked out yet. So hopefully I'll aspire to bigger things. I certainly, when people say retirement, it's just moving to a different form of work. One of the things I really regret, Alan and David, and you'll understand this, is that Australians are very highly regarded in America, and because of COVID, the ability to go there and on public speaking tours. Like, I'm really hot in America on China, but if you can't go there and it's limited, you can't get that that view out. We've led the way here, and I'm very proud of the role that I've played in seeing things before other people did.
Actually,
Yeah.
Michael, I want to jump in and say within the Jewish community, there are two issues that I know you've been loud on, and so has AJA, and they are the human rights abuses in China, particularly the suppression of the Uyghurs. You've seen some of our work in that, and with regard to Ukraine and the human rights abuses there, you're aware that we've developed a good relationship with the Ukraine ambassador in Australia. And on those two things, I don't think that anybody in our community that would dispute that AJA has done more than any other organisation.
And Kola Kavod to you for doing it, because they're two worthwhile causes. To have between 1 million and 2 million people because of their religion dragged into concentration camps, that's an issue the Jews should speak out about first, before anyone else, and the loudest.
And we
you
do
have,
less.
I have too.
We do less on things like climate change and on I don't know, a whole variety of distractions that we say are not really Jewish issues anyway. But
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thanks,
Well,
David.
you might ask the New Israel Fund where it is on the Uyghurs and get them to take delegations of Uyghurs or finance delegations of Uyghurs to see Monique Ryan and the Nebuch from Gold Street. What's her name?
Zoe Daniel.
Yeah.
Okay, Michael.
That would be something worthwhile for them to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. And thanks for your contribution. As I said, it's always a pleasure to have you. And we look forward to catching up with you again in the future. And thank you so much for joining us tonight, Michael Danby.
Keep up the good work.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Just before we go, the L'Chaim program with Morris Klein is on right now. That's 3ZZZ on FM 92.3. That's all we have for tonight. Join us next week with Yona Schiff-Miller on World Vision. I will just mention that Morris has got the Australian ambassador to Israel, Paul Griffiths, on, so have a listen to that. Don't forget that you can keep up to date with what the AJA is talking about on our Facebook page. Please like it and share it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you next week as usual. So from me, it's good night to you all. Bye for now.